Good afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of Halftime Talk. We're absolutely delighted to be joined by Ariel Cohen, Dr. Ariel Cohen, Managing Director, Energy Growth and Security at the International Tax and Investment Center. And it couldn't be a more serendipitous and opportune moment to interview Dr. Ariel Cohen on all of the geopolitical events impacting the energy markets. And of course, nothing greater than the war between Israel and Iran just ending. So, Ariel, thank you for joining us.
It's a great pleasure.
I suppose we'll start there, really. You can't ignore the 10,000-pound gorilla in the room, war between the two biggest sort of actors, if you like, at least in scale and all sorts of measurements in the region, have faced off for the first time, perhaps in history, really. There's been skirmishes, obviously, and there's been proxy skirmishes, but this was, I suppose you would call, by any definition, some form of a war that the US joined. Now we're kind of a few hours into the ceasefire. Is it the first page of history to be written on this last 2 weeks? How do you assess it? Is it a moment of great change? Is it not? How do you feel the first verse of history writes about this event?
First of all, as you said, it's an historic event. It is a clash of two radically different visions for the Middle East. The Iranian vision is a vision of a theocracy. It's a vision of a dictatorship by a particular religious, political entity in Iran. A lot of Iranians don't agree with the government they have. The Israeli vision is the vision of the Abraham Accords, of cooperation with UAE, with other moderate neighbors, Egypt, Morocco, Jordan, eventually, God willing, inshallah, Saudi Arabia, etc. So that's point number one. Point number two, Israel, traditionally, since 1948, since its birth, was aligned with the United States, for some time with France, the UK, with the West. It's a Western democracy. It has connections in business and culture and academia with the West. Iran is a part of BRICS, is a part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It is a major oil supplier to China. It is a major weapons supplier to Russia. It is in that camp. And if we had an analogy from boxing, I would say that Israel and the United States, as the West, won by points, not by a knockout. The regime in Iran survived clearly, remained coherent despite very severe blows. But the air superiority, the destruction, if not of all, but of majority of nuclear facilities of Iran, is a very serious blow to the Iranian regime. And it's too early to tell. We do not know if the Ayatollah will survive politically. He physically survived clearly. But politically, there are competing factions in Iran who have different vision for the Iranian future, including the urban educated elites who would like to see Iran more aligned.
Well, before we get
West.
into, getting into the granular cultural sense of things,
Yes.
and who's aligned with who, and but I wanted to get a sense of just sort of pick up on one thing you said there. The proxy. Are you positioning this? I mean, there's a lot of things, the West versus the East and all of that stuff, and democracy versus theocracy, and one could sort of contest a lot of the points you made, but I don't want to go there. I do want to, however, explore this idea of proxy. That is the Iran face-off, is the European de facto support for this, as the German minister said, that the German chancellor said that Israel was doing our dirty work. Is this a beginning or a part of what seems to be emerging sort of Cold War with China? How do you see it in those terms, Russia-China axis versus whatever the West is at this point?
Excellent question. There's a dichotomy here. The Iranian leadership focused on hatred of America, hatred of Israel since its inception. Death to America, death to Israel every Friday in the mosque. But in terms of a geopolitical alignment, Iran aligned itself with Russia and China. But it was a non-nuclear party yet, in that quadriga, as the Germans would say, in the quartet of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, the only non-nuclear country. And secondly, it was the weakest link, as we saw. The United States and Israel, by knocking out or delivering a severe blow to Iran, are doing the two following things. One, they signal to Russia and China that they mean business, that they may use force if pushed. And two, that by potentially knocking out the weakest link, including the land bridge that Iran may represent, that goes outside of the Suez Canal or the route around Africa, the bridge from China via Indian Ocean, via Iran to Russia, that may be endangered. And secondly, at the same time, we didn't talk about what Iran won. Iran saved not just the regime, it saved its oil and gas complex, its oil and gas industry that supplies China. And I assume, I don't have 100% clear knowledge, but I assume that the Chinese picked up the phone to Tehran and said, guys, do not escalate. We do not want to use oil supplies from Iran. Don't do it.
And I suppose there's also the Western interests, and it has been certainly a consistent performance by the West, the US, and to Israel to an extent in terms of its geopolitical engagement. It has always performed well, or with strong leaders, with dictators around it, that it's not necessarily seeking democracies mushrooming up across the Middle East, and that if you knock out or attempt to go further from the West perspective, the US-Israel perspective, you could leave chaos in Iran, like Syria, like Libya, on what is one of the world's most important energy waterways. Look at what a group of bandits the Houthis can do on the coast of the Red Sea with a few basic weapons. So there's that contingency, that energy piece that's a little bit different. What are your thoughts on that, that the day after maybe is a bit scary or uncertain, and the West needs to hold back on pushing too hard here?
It's a good question. Depends if, and we don't know yet, as Clausewitz, the great German theorist of war, said, there's always a fog of war in a war, right? A lot of things we don't know. Yeah. As Rumsfeld said, the known knowns, the unknown knowns, unknown unknowns. But the nuclear-armed Iran is not in the interest of anybody. It's not in the interest of Israel. It's not in the interest of Arab neighbors. It's not in the interest of Turkey, because then Turkey will feel pushed to come up with its own nuclear program. It's not in the interest of Israel, of course. It's not in the interest of Europe or the United States. It's probably not in the interest of Russia, because it depends how crazy the regime is. The Islamist dimension may trigger it to threaten Russia at some point. The Iranian leaders, and I dug very deeply on that, already started talking about protecting Muslims in the Caucasus. And these are not even Shia Muslims, they're Sunni Muslims in Chechnya and elsewhere. So the Russians pay attention to that as well. On the other hand, if you go the democratic and human rights route, there are four distinct ethnic and religious groups in Iran that have their rights trampled. It's, first of all, the Kurds in the northwestern part or the western part of Iran. It's Azeris, it's the Arabs in the southwest, and it's Baluchis in the southeast. So from that perspective, the question is how seriously we all collectively are taking the self-determination. Why self-determination? Let's say for what, 6-7 million of Palestinians, but not for 20 million or more, 40 million of the Kurds. Why no self-determination for the Azeris, who have the right for equality of their language in the Iranian constitution, and that right is trampled, et cetera, et cetera. We could continue with that. So the question is, what kind of a regime, what kind of promises? If this regime, the Ayatollah regime, promised Trump or promised the intermediaries, and we can rely on these promises, which is a big question mark, that they will stop enrichment to beyond the civilian 3.5%. If they stop funding, as you call them, bandits, the Houthis and other proxies, if they stop building up destructive ballistic missile arsenals, probably the West and Israel could live with that regime. If, on the other hand, tomorrow we see more enrichment, more ballistic missiles, I hate to break it to you, but we're going to see round two of this horrible, horrible war.
So this in a way is there's so many unanswered questions on the weapon piece of it all, and the stated objective of it all.
The strategic intention, yes.
Yeah, and so in some ways this is perhaps the today, and obviously I saw President Trump earlier this morning already sort of complaining by the violations that have already happened, apparently, or the intention, the sentiment wasn't respected. But that this is, you're sort of indicating this feels more like a pause than a end. There's no negotiated treaty here. Obviously, there's no new JCPOA here. There's just Trump telling both sides, okay, halas, enough, stop. And that's it. But there's nothing here that has been agreed upon.
Sean, I met Iranian regime people. I talked to them. On the one hand, there is the ideological component there that is very alien to liberal Westerners like ourselves. On the other hand, these are the people, as the adage goes, who invented the chess game. They're calculating, they're in certain ways rational, etc. So the question is, what is the internal damage assessment the regime is going to do? Will they say, look, we're rather weak, we're suffering under sanctions, we suffered very serious blows, our elites were destroyed, our nuclear facilities were destroyed. Shall we do what is the definition of insanity, which is doing the same thing again and expecting a different outcome? Or should we change course, protect the regime, but step aside from the enrichment and the ballistic missile arsenal and the proxies? That is negotiable with this administration. This is negotiable, and I think should lead to the recognition of the State of Israel by the Islamic Republic. Why? They don't have a common border. They don't have a territorial dispute. The dispute is ideological and existential. And the moment they are willing to walk away from that, just as Egypt, Jordan, UAE, and others did, Morocco, Bahrain, if I remember correctly, the whole picture of the Middle East may change.
Well, you also have the reality, of course, that regardless of quote unquote regime change, was thrown around quite willy nilly, a bit like close the straits for Moose. The supreme ruler is in his final days, in the sense he's 87 years of age, and so they are in a
86.
they are in a transition period anyway, and I would imagine they want some stability in order to manage that as the first priority. But just moving away from that immediately, just in terms of, I wanted to get to the energy piece of this, because one of the things that really struck me as historic in a way, amongst the list of historics is, missiles were flying across the Gulf last night and oil prices were falling.
I
Is
know.
the fact that energy and the sort of the real pressure that oil prices and gas prices to a lesser extent put on the world economy, and the fact that it seems to be off the table as a stress point in this conflict, is that a misreading of the situation? Is it good news if it is off the table, that this can be resolved without stressing the global economy? How do you see that the fact that energy and energy costs and the sort of spikes we saw when Russia invaded Ukraine or other previous conflicts in the Middle East have spiked the oil price in very dramatic ways, but this time it seemed to be very somber?
Well, I was watching with fascination, just as you said. The missiles are flying, bombing, and the oil prices are going down. So, what's going on here? It's a supply and demand, clearly, and it's also reserves. I looked at the reserves numbers. The reserves were 70% of an annual consumption, reserves around the world. So the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in the United States, reserves in Europe and elsewhere in Arab countries, the reserves could have supplied quite a lot. Secondly, Russia is not interested in Iran all of a sudden having its sanctions lifted and started pumping 5, 6 million barrels a day as it did under the Shah. Um, Iran is pumping what now? About a million. Um,
Well, it's a
Russia
bit
is
more than
happy,
that. It's about three and a half pre conflict, pre this war. It was three and a half. So they're
right? But
exporting about a million and a half.
I'm talking about the exports.
Yeah,
Okay, a
yeah.
million and a half. Uh, Iran is capable of exporting much more. Russia, which earns its money now from mostly oil exports because it lost its $50 billion a year gas market in Europe in its wisdom of Ukrainian invasion of 22, is very happy with that. Um, and the Iranians are also, as I said, they may be crazy, but they're not stupid. They are watching the Strait of Hormuz piece very carefully because their own oil is going out. And if they escalate it, it was made clear that Kharg Island may have gone in smoke. So they did not want to escalate to the point where Israelis would be taking out the Kharg Island. So this is a dance, a kabuki dance, and I think it's fascinating that one other piece that America has, and that the shale revolution and shale oil in the United States allowed the world to survive probably the worst Middle East war since the Iran-Iraq War of 1980, 1988, when oil prices, I remember I was a budding journalist at the time, the oil prices went way up at that time.
If you look at the what seems to be again on the list of historics in this, what makes this moment different, and what helped, I think, in some ways to keep it from unraveling too far, was that for the first time, this is a conflict that takes place after Saudi Arabia and Iran have found some kind of rapprochement curated by the Chinese. Was it 18 months ago, 2 years ago?
Something
Um,
23.
and that, I'm wondering your thoughts on that how big a change that is for the region? Did it have a role in this moment to keep things under control? Or how do you see that going forward at this time?
Saudi Arabia and UAE did not want this war. They made their position crystal clear. The war occurred regardless. But at the same time, we saw that Saudis allowed U.S. Forces in its territory to engage against Iran. Um, they probably were not happy with that, but nevertheless, when the Qatari territory, the Al Udeid base was attacked, all Gulf states expressed their displeasure and protest. Look, in the long term, as long as the Iranians have their hegemonic aspirations in the Gulf and in the Middle East, the Sunni Arab states will be scared, will be aware of that, will not like it, and may align even with Israel. As long as Iran changes track, if it changes its tack, with regime change or without regime change, too early to tell. Again, my gut, and sometimes in this business, you have to rely on your gut. After the blows of this magnitude, how does this old Ayatollah survive when we know that IRGC wants to rule directly? They realized that the rule of the faqih, of the religious scholar, is an anachronism. It is pushing Iran into archaic existence. And IRGC, in that respect, are much more modern. They don't want Velayat al-Faqih to continue. And we will see changes either now or when Ayatollah passes. And in that respect, the moderate Arab countries, including Saudi, have to be very careful because it's going to be a period of increased political risk and instability in Iran. And their strategic interest is to have Iran under control, as peaceful as possible, and not threatening them and their regimes.
If we could just wrap up with a little bit closer to home, Ariel, where you are in Washington, D.C. Of course, this was a very, very big moment for Donald Trump, because obviously the U.S. government, obviously they have a lot of engagement with this conflict and every conflict in the region, given their strategic role and weapons supplier, all that. But this was obviously the line crossed to be directly engaged, and most spectacularly on Saturday with the bombing of the nuclear sites. But my question is about the domestic politics in the US. It seemed that this event, the participation of this event, crossed a line for Trump in the sense that he went down the neocon road. You quoted there one of its architects, Donald Rumsfeld, the neocon interventionist, project American power, versus the sort of MAGA isolationist, retrenched back to America first, and all of that. I'm wondering, where is there lasting damage there? Is Trump emerging? Is he going down the neocon road, or how do you see the
Absolutely
coexisting
not.
of these two things?
Absolutely not. This is the far-right populist isolationist wing of MAGA. MAGA is a movement, and every movement has its wings. What's called the tech bros, the entrepreneurs, is one wing. The blood and soil wing is another wing. So the blood and soil were screaming, hands off, poor Ayatollah. But the neocon definition is project democracy, regime change, American values, etc. The realpolitik is a balance of power. China, Russia, no nuclear Iran. It's a different ball game. So Trump was never against projecting power, and he did not put boots on the ground. He sort of played a little bit. I think he just tickled the Iranians and the domestic wing, saying, well, if they don't play ball, why not regime change? His heart is not in regime change. His heart is not in a protracted war that his electorate doesn't want. But let's divide and understand the difference between those ideological people who want to turn every country on the planet into a democracy, and it spectacularly failed in Iraq, in Afghanistan, etc. And on the other hand, people like myself who care about a strong West, American power, who are not happy with the break between Europe and the United States, the break of the transatlantic alliance that some of these people are enacting right now. It's a different ballgame. And I think Trump is trying, at least, to thread that needle by not becoming a neocon. He is not a neocon by any stretch of imagination, not getting engaged with the Iranian regime change. And from my perspective, Iran is a big country with 3,000 plus year history. Only the Iranians can decide what regime they're going to have. It's up to the Iranian people.
Just to follow up on that, Ariel, you mentioned the big meeting, the NATO meeting this week, and Trump's role as a neocon or as a pan-Atlantist or not. Obviously, there's huge questions on that. What is your expectation for this meeting? It does seem to be set up to being, quite a meaningful one. Trump's first NATO meeting in his second term.
If I only look into the past, I think there may be a blow up. He walked away from the G7. He was irritated with a fancy talk shop. I've been to some of this meeting. They are usually in a very nice setting with a backdrop of the Alps or something like that, and very nice meals and a lot of talk and not much action. On the other hand, Trump is going to hammer the Europeans to get their military expenditure to 5% of the GDP. The only one that I'm aware of who's holding out is Spain, but everybody else is getting on board. I was just in Europe. I came back a week ago. The European elites understand that they better confront and deter Russia and do it on their own because the United States is checking out. Trump is focusing on China, on tariffs, and on domestic agenda. Trump is not going to be the kindergarten teacher for Europe as many, many American presidents were since 1945. Europe is on its own with some American support. It's going to take a long time to build up European power, but it is absolutely necessary as the United States is facing the Pacific.
We're going to have to wrap it up there. Absolutely fascinating to get your insights. Dr. Ariel Cohen, Managing Director, Energy, Growth and Security at the International Tax and Investment Center. Great to have your voice at the table at this very important week. The first draft of history, only a few hours since the gun stopped. We'll have to see. Hopefully that holds for at least a little while. Dr. Cohen, thank you.
Thank you so much.